call this special call workshop with the City Board of Directors for the purpose of discussing the 2021 budget. And I'm going to turn it over to Christina. And everybody make sure you're using the mic so you can be heard tonight, all during the night, because this is where we're recording. Our system is down, so I just started the recorder right up here, so make sure you're projecting. I'll project like Brad Burns and we'll be in good shape. So, Christina?
Good evening. As you've noticed, there's several workbook pages that have been provided to you.
You may just have to point it right into your mouth, I don't know.
I may. Is that better?
Not much for some reason. Can everybody hear? Not very well? Here we go.
Right line. Thank you. You're welcome. And it works. So you've noticed that there are several workbook pages that have been provided to you, and basically because you approved the self-funding healthcare, there's a new section added to the budget book. It's the internal service fund for the health insurance, which we will cover at the very end after the street fund. The budget summary was adjusted for this new fund, and there's a replacement of pages 6 and 7 just due to a scrivener's error. Before moving on to the detailed budgets, I'd like to recap a few items from the last meeting. During the board meeting, you approved the self-funding healthcare with Blue Cross and Blue Shield as our network provider. Staff is proposing a 2% across the board raise. City sales tax is budgeted 9% higher than 2020. In 2020, these taxes were originally budgeted 3% lower than 2019 because tax receipts were flat relative to 2018. And lastly, I'd like to remind you that the year-end cash projections for 2021 include total unrestricted cash of $32 million, a street account ending with $3.6 million, 5/8 sales tax, $7.5 million, 3/8 sales tax, $2.5 million, police department public safety funds, $491,000, fire department public safety funds, $101,000, and depreciation fund at $1.2 million for a total cash amount of $47.4 million. So with that, let's turn to the highlights of each fund, beginning with the general funds. After covering the highlights, I'll ask for questions before moving on to the next fund. Please hold your questions until the end of each fund, and unless otherwise stated, comparisons are to prior year budget. We'll begin with the general fund administration revenue on page 4. There's an increase of almost 6% in property taxes based on trend. And I guess I should start by saying pretty much what I'm going to do is go down the list of accounts and just hit the ones that are highlighted, but they'll all be in order. So there's a 6% increase in property tax based on trend. 2 weeks ago, we discussed the sales tax relative to current year projections and prior year actual numbers. The sales tax for 2021 is budgeted 9% higher than the 2020 budget, but it's also lower than anticipated actual receipts. There's a $74,000 or 4% increase in charges to other departments, and that's due to increased costs of the services provided. There's a $180,000 decrease in the sale of cooling water to SWEPCO, and that is based on purchases in 2020. Budgeted interest income is down 75% over prior year, or about $120,000. This assumes no further cuts in the interest rates. Private grants increased $220,000 to include the Sager Creek Stream Mitigation Project. The total increase in revenue is 3%. Approximately 57% of this increase is due to the budgeted transfers in 2021. The budgeted transfers are based on the policy. If you'll switch over to page 5, we'll look at expenditures. Personnel costs are up 15% compared to prior year. Most of the increase is due to relocating the public information officer. That position is scheduled to move from community development to administration. Proposed raises are 2%. Healthcare costs increased 2.5%. And there were other changes in healthcare benefit elections, increasing healthcare more than 2.5%. The personnel schedule on page 7 changed to include the public information officer. Overall, operations increased by 18% from prior year, or about $88,000. Utilities are down $6,000, or 16% based on trend. Law library is a new line item, and that provides the city attorney online resources for just over $3,000. Materials and supplies are lower by $5,000, or 20%. 2020 included additional fire-safe filing cabinets for HR. Miscellaneous increased 21%, or $4,200, and that is for the general funds portion of the Carroll Electric buyout for the annex property. Dues and training increased $6,500 to accommodate the public information officer's training. City events of $33,500 and economic development marketing of almost $47,000 were moved from community development. These are the budget line items related to the public information officer. Funding levels for Main Street and Chamber are at the same level as last year. $2,000 was added to the budget for continuing COVID-19 expenses such as masks, sanitizers, and gloves. And you'll see that new expense line item throughout the budget. There's a transfer of $262,000 to the street fund, and this is for the final phase of Simon Sager Avenue and streets. On page 6, capital includes new drapes for the boardroom and flashing speed limit signs, as well as the grant-funded projects, Main Street design, and Sager Creek stream mitigation. Are there any questions related to this fund?
Those speed limit signs are not for the boardroom, right? Okay, just make sure.
If you'll turn with me to page 8, police revenue. Local sales tax increased by 9, and SRO grant program is expected to increase by $9,000, or 6%. Lot B insurance turnback is expected to increase 6%. This is a function of payroll, so as payroll increases or decreases, so will this revenue amount. ARETS 911 board income will increase 189%, or $170,000. Basically, the tax funding for this revenue has increased, and also the distribution as how they distribute it among the various PSAPs has also changed. So we're benefiting from that. Government grants are expected to decrease 14%, or $4,000. Overall revenues are expected to increase by about $257,000, or 17%. Expenditures are on page 9. Personnel costs increased by $177,000. The main driver for this increase is the addition of 3 new positions, 2 lieutenants and a sergeant. That increase is offset by the removal of 1 full-time dispatcher and 1 part-time clerk position. These changes are all reflected in the personnel schedule on page 12. The 2% wage increase and 1 retirement are included in the increased personnel costs. The retirement payout is included in benefit pay. Healthcare decreased due to changes in benefit elections. Overall operations decreased by just over $5,000. However, a number of accounts changed, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the changes that were over $5,000. Telephone increased 14%, or $5,600 based on trend. System support and supplies decreased $6,000. These items charged here are normally paid for in finance. STFE, system support and supplies, decreased by 30%, or $9,000. And this is because there are fewer new mobile data terminals that will need to be purchased next year. STFE uniforms and protective equipment increased 33%, or $5,000 for the purchase of protective equipment. STFE dues and training decreased by $5,000, and those funds were moved to dues and training. And finally, dues and training increased by $10,000, or 25%. Half of this increase is the STFE funds, and the remaining increase is for de-escalation training. On page 11, capital outlay. The main capital outlay purchases for PD will be vehicles, including leased vehicles and motorcycles. Other purchases include paving and tree stump removal on the adjacent lot and an upgrade to WatchGuard, which is the current camera system. Most of the remaining public safety tax funds will be used to repay utilities for the AWIN citywide radio system. Are there any questions related to this fund? Okay. Moving on to fire, revenue is on page 13. Overall, the revenue will decrease by $19,000. Local sales tax increased by 9%. Ambulance services, which is revenues from ambulance runs, are budgeted lower based on trend. Rural fire service charges will increase based on trend by $5,000. And miscellaneous income will increase $10,000 based on trend. Expenditures are on page 14. The 3% increase of $108,000 in personnel costs is due to the proposed raises and increased healthcare costs, as well as 1 additional firefighter position. The new position is reflected in the personnel schedule on page 17. Lease costs increased to $5,600. A lease payment for an oxygen generator was improperly categorized as a printer lease in prior year and moved to finance. Insurance is increasing $9,000 based on property and workers' comp insurance rates increasing. Vehicle and equipment maintenance is increasing $7,000 based on trend. Dues and training EMS decreased $5,000 or 8% based on trend. And EMS accreditation is down $9,500. So full accreditation is only every 3 years, and the 2020 budget was increased to accommodate the full accreditation costs. COVID-19 expense of $5,000 was added to the budget for ongoing costs. Expenditures continue on page 15. There's a decrease in bad debt, which is a function of the ambulance receivables. Total operations decreased 6% or $67,000. Page 16, capital for the fire department in 2021 consists of projects and equipment, including a cardiac monitoring update, a sedan for staff training, and a PPE extractor dryer for Station 2. Most of the remaining public safety tax funds will be used to repay the utilities for the Fire Station 2 remodel and training tower. Are there any questions related to this fund? Parks and Recreation, their revenue begins on page 18. Revenues are down 24% over 2020, mainly due to the impacts of COVID-19 on the following. Registration for all programs, which is expected to be down 52% or $16,000. Fewer community building rentals for $11,000 or just over half. And an anticipated decrease in the use of the Family Aquatic Center, resulting in lower revenues overall of $51,000 or 45%. Expenditures begin on page 19. The increase in personnel of $73,000 or 9% include the wage and healthcare increases. And the remaining increase is due in part to healthcare benefit elections and a retirement. The payout for the retirement is budgeted in benefit pay, and there are no changes to the personnel schedule. Utilities are budgeted lower based on trend. Insurance increased by $23,000 or 44%, mainly due to additional property coverage for Memorial Park. Payments to contractors decreased 14% or $5,000 based on trend. Recreation support increased 17% to cover increased costs of assistance with summer leagues. And operations overall increased $9,600 or 2%. Expenditures continue on page 20. The Family Aquatic Center personnel costs are up 10% or $10,000. This is due to the minimum wage increase passed in 2018. Minimum wage will increase from $10 to $11 per hour in January. Operations will increase 3%, mainly due to added expenses related to COVID-19. Page 21, capital. The main purchases for 2021 include lawnmowers, HVAC for the Parks Office, and a kayak park conservation plan. Are there any questions related to this fund?
What was that kayak park what again?
Conservation plan.
Okay.
Court revenue begins on page 23. Revenue will decrease by almost $16,000 or 11%, and this decrease mainly relates to a decrease in the county salary reimbursement and APRS retirement. These reimbursements are based on the actual salary and retirement of the court clerk. Expenditures on page 24. Personnel, those costs will decrease 34%, and that includes the wage and healthcare increases. The court clerk is retiring at the end of this year. Her retirement payout was budgeted for 2020. And 2020 also included a hiring overlap to train the new court clerk whose salary will not be as high. Additionally, the part-time position is being removed. The personnel schedule on page 26 has been changed to reflect the removal of the part-time position. And operations remained relatively flat from prior year. Page 25, capital. Capital consists of renovations to provide ADA compliant restrooms for $130,000. Are there any questions related to this fund? Library revenue begins on page 27. Revenue decreased with an expected decrease in membership fees of $2,700. Expenditures on page 28. The personnel increase of $46,000 is due to the proposed raises, minimum wage increases, healthcare costs, and employee benefit elections. Due to the minimum wage increase, staff proposed moving all part-time positions to clerks, and this would eliminate the page position, and it is the only change to the personnel schedule on page 30. Operations decreased 20%. Ground and building maintenance decreased 65%, mainly due to all the landscaping being moved to parks in the 2020 budget. Books and publications decreased 15,000 or 32% based on trend, and basically fewer physical books were purchased and more online content was purchased due to COVID-19. Page 29 is capital outlay. Capital outlay is basically reupholstering the chairs throughout the library, which will make them easier to clean and sanitize. They're currently cloth, and they want to move to something that is vinyl, non-porous. Are there any questions related to this fund?
Yes. I do have a question about reupholstering.
Yes.
Is that because, I'm presuming we're cleaning more because of COVID? Is that a
Yes.
reimbursable thing maybe, or not?
Because it's permanent, it's not. Community development is next and includes planning, engineering, code enforcement, and the animal shelter. Revenue begins on page 31. Overall revenues will increase by $58,000 or 25%. And this is because electric permit income will be accounted for in this fund going forward. The electric permit income of $74,000 is offset by a decrease in building permits of $20,000. Expenditures on page 32. Personnel costs decreased $8,000 or 1%. This change includes the transfer of the public information officer to administration and the transfer of the electrical inspector to community development from the electric department in an effort to streamline services provided by the one-stop shop. The decrease
Christina,
also, yes.
Can you say that again, please?
Okay. So the public information officer is moving to community development, and the electrical inspector is moving to community development. The decrease also accounts for the proposed raise and minimum wage increases in healthcare costs. The code enforcement manager position is being changed to a community services manager. And the community services manager will oversee the animal shelter and the airport. And the wage of that position will be split between the departments. This will remove code enforcement officers, and those positions will be replaced by 2 animal control officers and 1 code compliance specialist. The transfers and position changes are reflected in the personnel schedule on page 34. Operations decreased 54%, or just over $285,000. This is due to decreased office supplies and dues and training related to the public information officer, and economic development, marketing, and city events. Both of those accounts were moved to administration. Professional fees decreased $197,000. The board goal of a comprehensive plan was budgeted in 2020. Capital is on page 33, but there's no capital outlay budgeted for 2021. Are there any questions related to this fund?
So, Christina, so I know that the city administrator, we'll call him Philip, had mentioned about that restructuring. I think we had some conversation about that. So what's the check on that to see how this is going to work in your restructuring? I know, I don't know, I wouldn't call it fairly significant, but I think it feels like, a pretty good change with getting electrical in and restructuring to address some issues.
Right. So at least the idea behind the electrical is to get everybody over there. And so one of the problems in the building department today is we really don't have a backup for when Randall Clark is off. So the electrical inspector will also eventually work into being a building inspector also. And Randall will also work to being sort of the part-time electrical inspector. Electrical inspector will train Randall on electrical inspections. Randall will train the electrical inspector on building inspections. So we'll have 2 building inspectors as we go forward. One of the problems, like I said, is when the current building inspector is off, we don't really have a certified building inspector backup. Okay? And on the animal control and code enforcement side of things, historically, years ago, we had true animal control officers, and then they got combined into code enforcement. And code enforcement today, with those 3 officers, is divided. The city's divided up into 3 zones that they operate. One of the issues that we run into is the interpretation of the code and the implementation of that code requiring interpretation, requiring some sort of, it's not being evenly interpreted across the board. And so what I want to try is having one code enforcement officer taking the animal issues out of their wheelhouse, taking some other issues that have been pushed over on them, away from them, as it relates so that they can just look at property maintenance and deal with that and have a consistent interpretation and enforcement of it across the whole city rather than within individual zones, if that makes sense. We're gonna see if it works. If it doesn't work, we may have to come back and make some adjustments, either midstream or in 2022. But I think historically, it's been my experience, if I can have one person working on code enforcement and just working on property maintenance issues, and that we're more consistent, if that makes sense.
Right.
And then the other issue that Christina mentioned, we're combining that individual who's been over code enforcement and animal control to now being over the airport manager, being the airport manager, and still the animal control manager.
Thank you.
infrastructure revenue begins on page 35. Revenue is the anticipated reimbursement amount for labor as a percentage of payroll. Expenditures, page 36. Personnel costs will increase by almost $23,000, mainly due to the proposed raises, increased healthcare costs, and changes on the employee benefit elections. There are no changes to the personnel schedule. Operations increased $7,000, mainly due to increased lease costs for the building that they occupy. They rent, basically they lease a building. And there is also an increased vehicle and equipment maintenance based on trend. Page 37, capital. There's no capital budgeted for 2021. Are there any questions related to this fund? Maintenance begins on page 39. Revenue is based on historical trends related to sales at auction. Expenditures, page 40. Personnel costs increased over $10,000 or 4%. The wage increases and healthcare cost increases are included. The increase in deferred comp is related to the recent handbook changes to ICMA contributions. There are no changes to the personnel schedule. Operations increased $38,000. This increase is due to moving to the new facility. Utilities increased $5,000 due to a larger facility. Office supplies increased $13,000 and include desks, tables, chairs, and lockers. Small tools and equipment increased $7,000 for moving and recalibrating equipment. Grounds and building maintenance increased $7,500 for repairs to doors and windows. Page 41, capital outlay includes fencing, shelving, and an exhaust vent for the new building scheduled for purchase. Are there any questions related to this fund?
Christina,
Yes.
where does the rental income that we're getting for the building come into?
That will actually, we had not added that money into the budget yet because it had not been to my knowledge, it's not a signed contract yet, is it? No. So that will end up being miscellaneous revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Help me remember, so we're holding on, as we make that transition, we're holding on to the old maintenance. What, did we discuss, are we just holding on to that and use it as a storage, or what was our?
I think the discussion that we are looking into is moving the parks maintenance shop off of Highway 59 to that building. The parks maintenance shop, the old fire station.
Yeah, they're out. Yeah.
They're busting at the seams.
Yep.
And the idea, we need more indoor space to store equipment out of the weather. Right now, we're storing it, it's wall to wall in that building. We're keeping some of it in the trailers. We just don't have enough space for that. So at least for the time being, that's the plan once maintenance moves to the new facility.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Finance, which also includes IT and utility billing. Revenue for that department begins on page 43. Revenue decreased $8,000. That's based on historical auction sales and old receivables that are being paid out. Expenditures begin on page 44. Personnel increases are due to the proposed raise and healthcare cost increase, offset by the removal of the part-time utility billing clerk. The total increase is $11,000 or 1%. In addition to the removal of the part-time position, the ambulance billing clerk is being reclassified as an accounts payable receivable clerk with no added cost to the budget. These changes are reflected in the personnel schedule on page 46. Operations decreased 2% or $16,000 due to the following. The oxygen generator lease for $5,600 was moved back to the fire department. And a decrease in printer contract accounts for the remaining decrease in leases of $5,500. Postage increased almost $6,000, and postage will continue to grow as our customer base grows. Wireless development increased by $5,000 as that project continues to wind down. Software license renewal increased just under $7,000 or 2%. Materials and supplies are lower by $5,000 or 29% based on trend. Capital on page 45. It includes the next phase of a disaster recovery project that provides off-site archived backups for all of the city's data and a core stack for $50,000. Are there any questions related to this fund? So that is the end of the general funds. Shall we move on to the electric fund and the utilities?
It's your call.
It's ready.
Are we voting?
Well,
Is this
I
early
think last
voting
time-
on that, or
I
is
think,
this-
I think last time we asked what was the pleasure of the board to continue
Can we
on.
get a sticker?
Well, let's see. You're thinking of time. Is that what you're
Yes,
talking
I'm
about?
thinking of time. We have about 22 minutes. So I can continue. I'm sure I can get through electric and potentially some
Let's
water.
do that. I think we got time for that. Is that okay by everybody?
The electric revenue begins on page 47. Permit fee income moved to community development. Gross sales are expected to decline by 1.8 million based on trend, which is partially due to COVID-19 and the resulting closure of schools and businesses. And although we chose to budget conservatively, the power cost is expected to decline by 1.9 million, resulting in a net increase in utility sales of $100,000. So we're looking at utility sales versus power cost. Economic incentives decline over time, and service extension fees are expected to increase due to continued growth. These gains will be offset by an anticipated decrease in interest income. The net effect is a slight increase in revenue of about $30,000. Expenditures begin on page 48. The increase in personnel costs includes both the wage increase and changes in healthcare costs, but the main driver is the addition of 2 linemen. The additional linemen are reflected in the personnel schedule on page 50. Administrative department charges increased 3% or $11,000 based on cost of services. Insurance increased due to increased property rates and the number of vehicles insured. So our property insurance has gone up as well as the number of vehicles that we have in our fleet for the electric car. The The increase of $70,000 in materials and supplies is based on trend. Miscellaneous increased almost $10,000 to cover the electric department's portion of the buyout of the Carroll Electric for Annex property. Payments to contractors decreased $80,000 for tree trimming, as much of the backlog has been addressed. Depreciation typically increases each year as more assets are put into service. However, as old assets become completely depreciated, the annual amount of depreciation may decrease. And for 2021, the anticipated decrease is about $100,000. The transfer from the electric fund increased by $56,000. And again, all transfers from utilities in 2021 are based on the policy. Page 49, capital. Overall, capital outlay increased $148,000. Some of the larger capital projects this year include updates to the Moss substation for $180,000, general line extensions of $500,000, a tree trimming budget for $220,000, and underground conversions for $175,000. Are there any questions related to this one? Water revenue begins on page 51. Overall, revenues are expected to increase by $641,000. The 5/8 cents sales tax is budgeted based on 2020 receipts, as previously discussed, resulting in a 9% increase. Water revenue will increase 9%, and that is based on trend and anticipated growth. Water administration expenditures begin on page 52. Personnel costs increase due to the proposed wage increases and healthcare increases, but most of the increase was offset by changes in the benefit elections. Operations decreased by 2%, or $6,000. Administrative department charges increased, and decreases include insurance and legal fees. 2021 will be the first year of repayment on the loan for the water treatment plant. This will be interest only until construction is complete, and $543,000 was budgeted for interest expense. Capital outlay, which is listed on page 55, has increased this year by almost $580,000 from 2020. Budgeted projects include general line extensions of $300,000 and the water intake line for the plant upgrades, which are not covered by the loan. Transfers increased by $141,000, or 9%. Water plant expenses are on page 53. Overall, personnel costs increased 3% due to the proposed wage increase, healthcare increases, and benefit elections. Total operations costs decreased 1%. Utilities decreased 5%, or $8,500, because staff has been able to use reservoir water during the winter and early spring using the pump less. Lab fees are increasing by almost $5,000, or 15% based on trend. Safety supplies increased almost $5,000 for the purchase of confined space equipment. Chemicals increased over $12,000 based on an upward trend in chemical usage. Ground and buildings maintenance decreased $7,000. Most of the tree trimming was performed in 2020. Depreciation decreased 1%. Water services expenses are on page 54. And increases in personnel costs are the proposed raise, healthcare increases, and change to the ICMA contributions for the handbook. Overall, operations remained flat, mainly due to the decrease in depreciation of almost $6,000. On page 55, we discussed when looking at page 52, and on page 56, there are no changes to personnel. Are there any questions related to that fund?
Christina, on page 51, you probably addressed this, but I didn't get it. Looks like the biggest increase is for utility sales. Did you explain that?
Basically, our utility sales have gone up. We're growing as a city.
So not because of increased rates, but because of, or is it partly that too?
Well, in code, there is an increase.
Okay.
So that increase, which actually is, we anticipated, I think, maybe 1%
Okay.
for an increase.
And then growth.
And growth.
Christina,
Yes.
page 52, the bottom numbers are kind of alarming with the big difference. And I know that we've got the interest expense, but, I mean, that's part of it, but what's the major bulk of the expenses that's changing?
Well, 543,000 is the interest.
Right, but we've still got another 800,000 somewhere out there.
Let's see.
Capital
So,
outlay, $500,000.
580,000 is an increase in capital outlay.
Mhm.
So that's a significant portion of that as well. Let's see, and the transfers also increased 141,000. So between those three items, that's the bulk of your increase.
Okay, thanks.
If I may, a big part of that capital outlay is that $410,000 for the city portion of that new water line that's in Oklahoma that the loan doesn't pay for.
Okay.
You want to try wastewater? We got
10 minutes?
10,
Sure.
well, you got 5 and maybe 5. Yeah, I think y'all good with it. I say we move on and try to get through wastewater as well.
Okay. Wastewater revenue begins on page 57. Overall, revenues are expected to increase 7% based on trend and anticipated growth. Wastewater administration expenditures begin on page 58. Personnel costs include the proposed wage increase and healthcare increases, but the increase was offset by a change in benefit elections, resulting in a slight decrease in personnel costs. Operations increased 8% or $43,000. Administrative department charges increased 4%. Insurance increased 35% due to increased property and flood insurance. Debt service increased 6% based on the repayment schedule. Capital outlay is down by $222,000. In 2021, one lift station repair is budgeted for $60,000. Equipment purchases include a backhoe replacement for $150,000 and positive displacement blowers for $50,000. Transfers increased by $89,000 or 7%. The wastewater plant expenses are on page 59. Overall personnel costs decreased 12%. The driver for this decrease is the retirement payout of $42,000 budgeted in 2020. Total operations costs increased 2% or $5,000. Utilities are up based on trend by 8% for $16,000. Laboratory supplies is up $6,000 based on trend. Equipment maintenance is up $16,000 based on trend. With the growth of the city, organic compounds are up and more chemicals are required to treat the water. Chemicals increased by $35,000 or 22%. Ground and building maintenance is up almost $10,000. Buildings and equipment will be painted in 2021. Depreciation is down 2% based on assets placed in service versus assets no longer depreciating. Wastewater services expenditures are on page 60. A 9% increase in personnel costs are the result of the proposed raises, healthcare increases, and changed benefit elections. Overall, operations increased by $9,000 or 1%. Should say $9,000 or 1%. This is mainly due to the decrease in depreciation of $12,000 based on assets placed in service versus assets no longer depreciating. Capital is on page 61, and we discussed that while discussing page 58. Are there any questions related to this fund?
We probably ought to wrap it up right there. If anybody has any further questions of Christina right now, we might try to get those in. But as far as moving to another department, I think we probably ought to call a halt. Any questions, any further questions, comments? Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much. And,
Mayor?
Yes.
So just, again, going through these numbers, if you have any questions between now and the next board meeting, please let us know. We'll make sure we bring those answers back to you, and then next board meeting, we'll probably just schedule for 30 minutes to get through the remaining funds, because I don't think it'll take a whole hour, but we want to make sure if you have any questions that we get those answered at the next meeting.
Very good. All right. Without objection, this workshop is adjourned. Thank you all. I call this city board meeting for October 20, 2020 to order. Roll call.
Sappington,
Here.
Smiley,
Here.
Burns,
Here.
Hunt,
Here.
Rissler,
Here.
Coleman,
Here.
Carroll.
Here.
Would you please stand as Director Coleman leads us in our opening prayer and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Gracious Father, we thank you for the beauty of this fall day. We thank you for the rain that we've received to nourish the earth. Lord, we pray your guidance as we discuss the matters before us tonight for our city. Pray that you give us good insight and good vision. In Christ's name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome. This time I'd like to make sure that everyone in the audience or up here on the board has your electronic devices silent so that we won't interrupt someone should that decide to go off or get a call. All right. Public input. The public may address the board of directors regarding any item on the consent agenda or any city business not listed on tonight's regular board meeting agenda. If you'd like to address the board, the public on any of these two items, either the agenda, the consent agenda, or this is not listed, please come forward, state your name and address. Being no one, we will move on with our regularly scheduled or our consent agenda. All right, here is our consent agenda for this evening. Item A, budget workshop minutes for October 6, 2020. Item B, regular meeting minutes, October 6, 2020. Annual chemical bids for Public Works Department, Water-Wastewater divisions, multiple vendors and costs. Item D, 2020 surplus declaration. Item E, amendment, 2020 personnel schedule, Police Department. Item F, submersible mixers, Public Works Department, Wastewater Division, JCI Industries, Inc., in the amount of $93,622.50. And G, Resolution 49-20, authorizing signers for Corona Relief Funds grant. Board, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Carol?
I move that we adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Can we point out in the minutes that I changed the name from Jeffrey Bates to Jake Chavis?
Okay. Everybody got that? All right, we've got that, make that change. We have a motion and a second. Notification of the Scrivener's error there. All those in favor? We don't do this roll call, do we? We do, no, we don't do it. Yeah, we do this roll call. I didn't even write that down for some reason. Roll call, please. Renee?
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Consent agenda is approved as presented. Thank you. Now we move on to our regularly scheduled items. First one is ordinance 20-27, second reading, rezone from R2 to C2, 1,000 to 1,200 block of East Kenwood Street. Ben Rhodes?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Board, and Ray, Senior Planner. Before you is the second reading for a rezone request of the 1,000 to 1,200 block of East Kenwood Street. This is to rezone the 4.55 acres from R2 to C2 low bay commercial. Since the previous reading, staff has not received any additional comments on this, and we continue to recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from the audience?
Yeah, my name is Jake Chavis. I'm representing the owner. I'm an engineer for Bates and Associates and the engineer on this project. I'd like to request that you do both of the readings, the second and the third, tonight.
All right. Staff have any objection to second and third reading? Very well. Board, what is your pleasure? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
make a motion to place ordinance 20-27 on its second and third reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion to suspend? Being none, we'll vote on the motion to suspend. Roll call?
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Chrysler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-27, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code, city zoning map, rezoning from R2 to C2 property located in the 1,000 to 1,200 block of East Kenwood Street.
Thank you, Philip. I will now entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 20-27.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Is there discussion on the motion to adopt? Being none, we will vote on motion to adopt. Roll call?
Hunt,
Yes.
Chrysler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted. Next is ordinance 20-28. First reading, annexation of 39.22 acres, 14701 North Country Club Road. Ben Rhodes?
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Mayor and Board. Before you is an annexation request to take in 39.22 acres of territory located at 14701 North Country Club Road. This is the site of the Enduro Park preliminary plat that was approved by the Board of Directors on June 2nd this year. The annexation includes 3 different zones. These match to the preliminary plat. These are R2 single family, R4 multifamily, and PK for parks. The property will be added to Ward 2. Here you see the site plan provided with the petitioner's application. The subject property is being is shown within the bolded lines there. For reference, this is north of the power substation on North Country Club Road and immediately across the street from Wheeler. So the petitioner has also included a proposed zoning plan exhibit. The proposed R2 zone is for single family, that's shown in the green shading. The salmon color is the R4 multifamily zones. And I would point out that when the R4 shading is over these lots here, which I'm circling, those are intended for 2-family housing, and that would be likely development due to those lot size within those lots, that we would not be able to fit in more than 2 family. Finally, the blue color there is the zone specifically for the proposed park. Again, this proposed zoning is matching to the approved Enduro Park preliminary plat. Here is the future land use map. You'll see that the proposed zone is consistent with the map's guidance for mixed use and also for the park there in the center. Staff is recommending approval of the ordinance as presented with no needed conditions, and we are available for any of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Anyone here that would like to address this particular ordinance? Being none, then I will turn it over to the board for comments and or questions of staff.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes?
Ben, could you explain the condition that the county was saying about the right-of-way?
Yes, so for the annexations that abut a right-of-way, the county is wanting the city to go ahead and take that right-of-way as part of the annexation. So that would be the section along here along North Country Club there, that circle.
So is that land included in the land that we're wanting to annex?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
It was hard to see where it was in conjunction to what we're asking to annex. Thank you.
You didn't have Ben's magic pen.
I didn't have Ben's red pen.
All right, any other questions, any other comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion on ordinance 20-28.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes? Yes, read.
I recommend we place ordinance number 20-28 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion on the motion to suspend?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I just remind the board is that where this is located, if we have, I wouldn't call it significant development, but we have some apartment complexes going in and out there. They've got one in place that we've approved. It had some drainage issues. The people that live in the county that abut this property had addressed the board before. Just over the next couple of readings, if that comes up again, we have addressed that in the past, and we made the owners aware that, you know, although they live outside the city, they abut the city, and that, you know, we cannot stop the growth and development of what is occurring. So they were a little disgruntled with the development to the east, and now this is basically, you know, in their backyard. If you go out there and look, there is a significant amount of material being moved and put in place. I mean, there's quite a bit of work been going on for quite some time. So just be aware that, like we've done in the past, we've tried to reach out to people and talk about annexation and the potential growth and development. And now it is, this is, you know, the action is taking place. So if you hear that, we have addressed it in the past, and I just want to remind those that may or may not be aware of some of the things we've been concerned about. As far as expansion on that road, one of the concerns, the development to the east, is traffic volume. And we have significant industry out there. You know, it's a great cut-through ride if, you know, if you're a bike rider going up towards Gentry at certain times of the day. But I know when we talk about the street master plan, at some point, this may rear its head and become, as we reevaluate the master plan, as we develop out here with that residential, this may be one of those that we might want to revisit in the next year or so as we review the street master plan. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just
Yes,
one
ma'am.
other thing. We're just voting on the annexation. We're not looking at the design.
That is correct.
Okay.
Any other comments? Being none, then we will vote on the motion to suspend on ordinance 20-28, placing it on its first reading, suspending rules and reading title only. Roll call?
Chrysler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt.
Yes.
Motion approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-28, an ordinance accepting the annexation of certain territory described as the Enduro Park addition to the city of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and assigning the same to a ward.
Thank you, Philip. Now we'll move on to ordinance number 20-29. First reading, annexation of 6.10 acres, 22,000 Highway 16. Mr. Ben Rhodes.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Mayor and the board. Before you is another annexation request. This one is taken 6.1 acres, and as the mayor mentioned, this is at the 22,000 block of Highway 16 South. This is directly behind the warehouse that is across the street from A Spring Carbs. You guys are familiar with where that is. The annexation includes one zone, that would be the I-2 zone, which is light industrial, and the property will be added to ward number 3. Here is the site plan that was provided with the petitioner's application. The area proposed for the annexation is all within Lot 1 as part of that site plan. And here is the future land use map. You see that the proposed zone is not within any shading on the map. Given that the majority of the designated area is already developed, staff remains supportive of the proposal due to some of the industrial uses that are already established in the area, particularly to the west. And with that, we are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from the audience? If not, I'll turn it over to the board for comments and or questions of staff. There are no comments, and I'll entertain a motion
Mr. Mayor,
to suspend. Yes.
I move that we place ordinance number 20-29 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Thank you, Carol. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion of the motion to suspend?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to ask, the road that's going to be from Waukesha to 16, is this anywhere in relation to it?
I believe you mean the extension of Porter Road. Yeah, this is about maybe a half mile south of there. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Being none, then we will vote on the motion. Roll call?
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Christie.
Yes.
Approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-29, an ordinance accepting the annexation of certain territory described as the Beehive addition to the city of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and assigning the same to a ward.
Thank you, Philip. That concludes all our staff items, all our regularly scheduled items, and we move on now to staff reports. Philip?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first thing on the staff report is the third quarter goal update. In your goals, we've updated goal A1, B1, C1, E1, and I1. I made a slight change in the way the updates are made, and going forward, I'll start adding a paragraph, and you'll see in this one, on those goals, there's a new paragraph called third quarter 2020 update, so you can actually see exactly what the update is. So if you have any questions, board, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. As it relates to my administrator's report, I have an expenditure to report for $35,364 in the Public Works Department Street Division for the asphalt underlayment for the Simon Sager Phase 3. So we're ready to start asphalting that third phase of Simon Sager Drive. We've been reporting in the past that the census was going to be through the end of this month. The lawsuit was settled, and the census officially ended on October the 15th. We were around 68.7%. We were just under 70%, but we were ahead of the state and ahead of the national reporting as far as the reporting rates. A few weeks ago, a month ago, we had some potential discussion about a situation where some improvements were installed in the right-of-way, and we worked with that business owner and got those improvements relocated out of the right-of-way. But during staff's review of the rules and regulations as it relates to that, I found a section of the code that actually answered some questions that I've had for the last few years. Historically, staff has been approving special event permits and approving road closures as it relates to those special event permits. And what the code actually says with regard to the obstruction of public lands in section 86-3 is that no person shall obstruct any street, and obstruction means to block or cause to be occupied in conflict with its public use, whether it be a street, a sidewalk, a trail. And that the Board of Directors by resolution may permit temporary variances from this section. I've always been a little concerned that staff has had, and at some point years ago, been given the authority to approve the closures of streets, but by code, you are the only one that have the authority to really close the streets. So what you're going to see going forward is we will start bringing resolutions, and thank goodness you have the consent agenda we will be bringing resolutions not for approval of special event permits, but for the approval of the closure of any street related to a special event permit. So in the view of street closures for a Dogwood Festival, for Homegrown Festival, for a high school homecoming parade, we're going to work with all those individuals to get those early and put that in a resolution with a map of what streets are to be closed, and try to bring those to you. We'll package up as many as we can in one resolution, but it's really going to be, it's really the board's authority to approve the closure of streets, not staff's authority. So I wanted to make you aware of that change. For September, our sales tax receipts are up. For the month of September, we're up 10.4%. Year to date, we're up 13.7%. The county for the month was up 21.6%, and year to date is up 8.2%. Early voting is happening today through Saturday, or through Monday the 2nd at the clerk's office here in the city and at the community building. I would note that I've driven by the county clerk's office on Lincoln Street the last few days, and there's a line outside every time I drive by for early voting. And today I voted at the community building. They have 16 or 18 spaces to vote. There was no line. There was hardly anybody there. So I would encourage anybody that is wanting to vote early to consider going to the community building, because I was in and out in seemed like less than 5 minutes. On November 3rd, the voting locations will include the First Christian Church here in Siloam, St. Mary's Catholic Church, and the community building, and the Logan Community Building. It will not be at the county clerk's office. And then lastly, or almost last, would mention again that you as a board adopted Resolution 13-20, supporting the extension of the half-cent sales tax, which on the ballot is issue 1 for the Constitution. And subject to that passing, what that means to the city is about 1/3 of our revenue that goes into building and maintaining streets. It's about $350,000 for the city, and for the county, it's almost $1.8 million that we would lose if that half-cent sales tax and that issue 1 fails. And then lastly on my report, I wanted to bring to your attention that there are a couple of potential purchases that I think you should consider, and I want to ask the board, if there's no objection, that you allow, or at least don't object to staff trying to possibly negotiate a potential purchase that would be subject to the board, and we would have to bring back a purchase contract. One of them, I won't name the address because the property is not on the market for sale. It's a piece of property that has flooded in the past. We have had problems and had issues. We've had to go out there and make rescues during the middle of the night when we've had huge rainfalls, because the building is flooding and people are living in the building. I would like to I think there's an opportunity to purchase that building, and in my opinion, the property should have never developed. It's at an area where 2 drainage channels come together, and it constantly, heavy rains constantly impact that drainage channel to the degree that it overflows. There's another property that has gone onto the market, and if they can bring it up on the overhead, I want to show you this one. This one recently went on the market earlier, maybe late last week. In this image, you're looking at Highway 59 south of 412. The large facility over there on the left is Pipe Life. The large facility that's in the middle of the screen is the Simmons plant at Highway 59 and Porter Road. And the city owns 20 acres right there, south of the intersection of Lake Francis. It was at one time we discussed the possibility of moving the rodeo ground to this 20 acres, and we never could figure out how to really make that work. And so city staff, we've been looking at long-term, what could we use that property for? And we think that long-term, as the city grows, as city services and facilities need to grow, that 20 acres is a likely place for that to happen. I would point out also that immediately north of that property is one of the city's electrical substations. So we've got that 20 acres, we've got about an acre there with the substation, and the property that's for sale is 3 acres immediately north of that. It's directly across from the intersection of Lake Francis Drive. And I think from a long-term perspective, having that 20 acres there and the ability to maybe purchase some additional property around that 20 acres, long-term, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years from now, the city's gonna need that property to expand its facilities and its services. I can't tell you today that we have a specific plan for that, but I can tell you 2 things that we are looking at in the near future. One of them is the Public Works building. You heard earlier today, Christina said that the infrastructure crew is renting basically one of those little modular office buildings that we're spending, I don't know, $9,000 or $10,000, whatever it was in the budget, a year to rent that. We need to expand the Public Works building. In expanding the Public Works building, we're also gonna eat up more of their yard space, so that we don't have enough space there. And then the other issue for us is ultimately, as this city continues to grow, we're gonna need a warehouse for our utility inventory, electric, water, and wastewater inventory of materials. And this 20 acres is an appropriate place for that. If we were to be able to purchase that 3 acres, the idea of having a driveway directly across from Lake Francis Drive makes a lot of sense, rather than a driveway south of that, and then you have these offsetting turning movements and offsetting, road intersection and driveways. So if the board doesn't have any objections, I would like to proceed with trying to negotiate purchase agreements with these property owners. It would all be subject to the board. You would have final say. It would be a purchase agreement that would have a condition that it's subject to board approval. And then we would come back. You would have to amend your budgets because we don't have the money budgeted for that. But I wanted to make you aware of it, and then just, if I could, if there's any objections, if you'll let me know or give me some feedback one way or the other. And Mr. Mayor, board, that's all I have. Thank you.
If I would connect over to where Parks and Rec has their maintenance stuff and all as well, wouldn't it?
Well,
To the north
yes,
of that, right to the
Parks
north
and
of that
Rec,
park.
Parks and Rec has their maintenance in that corner. Everybody probably knows where it is, the old fire station. We own a small piece there. We're gonna move Parks and Rec to the old maintenance shop. There's also the Fire Station 3 south of this property, there on South Point. So again, my opinion is, even though we don't have a specific use for that property today, we have that 20 acres, that's gonna be valuable to the city in the future, and the ability with that property coming on the market, there's the opportunity to expand that land a little bit for the city and its future needs.
Right. Any comments for Philip regarding this? No, without objection, Philip, I'd say proceed as you asked.
Thank you.
All right, then let's get over here to my schedule here. Let's move on to director reports. Director Hunt? Director Hunt?
I'm first.
Yes, ma'am.
Want to thank the city staff who are handling the fall cleanup. I believe that's going on this week, seeing several piles of one man's trash that's becoming other man's treasure along the streets. I do appreciate that service, and we're very fortunate to have that. I have relatives here from Minnesota right now, and they had noticed some of the piles, and I said, do you not have anything like that in your town? Oh, no, we don't have anything like that in our town. So I think we're very fortunate to have that service, and I know we were reduced down to one this year because of COVID, but I'm assuming we'll get back on schedule with 2 a year if possible. I'm starting with this one this fall, one this spring. If that changes, just let us know. Thank you also to the staff who are looking into the Christmas light contest. I suggested last meeting. I think that could be a fun way sort of brighten up the holidays and end the year on a maybe a little lighter note, literally, than the rest of the year has been. And then up on my soapbox just a little bit, I've been thinking a lot recently about the golden rule that says do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think we sometimes forget that not only is this a biblical principle based on scripture, but that the others referred to in the rule includes even those with whom you disagree, and even politicians, from the top all the way down to the local level. I've heard several negative comments about those running for office, even here locally. Comments about candidates that were made by people who probably wouldn't want negative comments made about themselves. Despite what some may think, it's not about power and money for everyone who seeks to serve the public in some official capacity. I personally didn't even know the position of board of director was paid until after I was elected. And while I certainly appreciate it, I assure you it's not a huge sum of money that is making any of us rich up here. Again, I do appreciate it. I know that many public servants, including those in this room, also serve for the sake of serving and not for the power or for the money. I'm thankful for the city staff, current board members, and those seeking office, locally and state and nationally, who truly do care about our community and our citizens. As we all know, the early voting has begun and will continue through November 3rd. I encourage you to research all the candidates. I encourage you to vote your conscience, and I encourage you to allow others to vote their conscience as well.
Thank you, Minnie. Brad?
I just quickly say, I really like the post getting updated on the complaint page. I like that word, and I saw a couple of folks that are good complainers, and I'm glad they're using that page, and I like the follow-up on it. And so I just really appreciate that, and it shows we're listening, so it's really a listening page, and I just wish more folks would be aware of that, maybe use that. And a lot of sacrifice has been made for us to get out there and vote. So please vote, respect the process, and respect the outcome. Thank you.
Brad? Marla?
I want to do a shout out to my volunteers at the Manna Center. We have been working really long hours to make sure that we're getting food out to the families. And with a nonprofit, you are there by the grace of God, and you're there with the help of the community. And the Manna Center is growing. We just received a $30,000 grant to do mobile pantry to an adjacent town that has no grocery store in it, and they're really in need of food for families. And I need more volunteers to do that. This may not be where I need to do that, but if you can ask to be voted for, I guess I can ask for a volunteer. So I just want to thank everybody that supports the Manna Center, and keep washing your hands and wearing your mask.
Lisa?
Halloween's coming up. I hope everybody stays safe. I know the downtown trick-or-treating has been canceled, but there are some alternatives out there. Just stay safe. Hopefully participate in the alternatives, because they work hard to put those events together. And everybody have a good, happy Halloween.
Thank you. And Philip, I want to just echo something about your vote, your comment about the community building. One of the poll captain down there, I think that's what they're called, Ron Ramsey, but he was thankful for the city allowing them to put signs up along the north side of the community building to reserve that for voters. The businesses have been, he said the businesses have been cooperating with that. That helps, especially for those who in inclement weather or may need a little help making those steps. It was amazing how fast you got through. Kathy and I went there about 2 o'clock, and I mean, it was packed. There was a ton of people there. I think there were more voters than there were workers, but it was probably pretty close. There was a lot of folks, but it was very efficient, and it's the first time I've ever gone to vote and gotten a gift. So if you go to vote, you get a stylus that you get to take home with you. How about that? All right? Okay, but anyway, this is something that we are so blessed, as has been already mentioned, that we have the freedom to vote the way we wish to. And I think we've got some good candidates. We've got some good people running for city board and for our state and our country. And everybody, remember, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain. All right, not that you should complain necessarily, but that's kind of, without voting, you don't have that afforded to you. Read.
Please exercise your right to vote. Thank you.
That's it? Short and sweet. All right. Carol?
As you can see, I have voted, and it was, as Philip, our administrator, said, it was very easy, and it was fairly quick and very well organized, and I appreciated that. I did go to the community building. I want to recognize Detective, is it James McFerrin and Corporal Jeff Bland? They were nominated for the Northwest Arkansas Adopt-A-Cop Group's Officer of the Year, which I think is outstanding to have those nominations. We have a new pickleball opportunity on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 to 11, or Tuesday and Thursday from 7 to 9. Now, presuming that's at night, and it's at the tennis courts. We also have free tree giveaway, November the 7th from 8 to 11 at the library, at the parking lot across the street from the library. And you can get one tree per utility bill. And I also want to recognize the city crews for landscaping the museum, and they set some statues up there. And I'm not sure, I think this is going on right now. It's called the Story Walk, and it's the library, Main Street, and Friends of the Library are promoting this, and you can pick up a map at the library, and it's for families. Doesn't have to be families, it can be anybody, but even children. You take this walk, and there's like 16 businesses that will have pictures of these books in their windows or on their door. So I think that sounds extremely fun, and you bring this map back, and there is a little bitty prize for you at the end when you take it back to the library. And I would encourage everybody to vote as well. There are so many people that sacrifice for our freedom to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Mr. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 1,014 people, I believe, voted yesterday in our two local places, so that's good. I encourage you to do the same. Shout out to a couple of our staff people, Steve Gorsuch, thank you very much for the sidewalk work I see going on in town, repairing and actually replacing quite a bit of it. And also for some of the street repairs he conducted. I mentioned a couple of them to him, and before I knew what was going on, they were fixed. So that's a great thing that the residents were very thankful for that. Also to Holland Hayden, I just enjoy seeing those update memos that she sends out. They're a great thing. I asked for that many times to show our citizens what we're doing. You know, we're doing something. I mean, with all this equipment we say we buy, and it's actually out there doing lots of work and lots of good things, and I really appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, if there's no further business, I would make a motion we move to executive session for the purpose of discussing the city administrator's employment.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion on the motion to adjourn into executive session? Seeing none? All those, let's see. Can I do that by, I can do that by voice, can I not, Jay, or is that a vote? No, that's probably a roll call vote, isn't it? Yes. Roll call, please.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Bristler,
Yes.
Holt.
Yes.
Motion is approved. This body, I can do this without fogging up here. This body has voted to retire in the executive session to consider the employment of City Administrator Philip Patterson. We will reconvene in public session to present and vote on any action arrived at in private. So we are, the board meeting is. Call this city board directors meeting back into order after adjourning for a executive session. Bob?
Mr. Mayor, I move that I'd like to make a motion that we continue the city administrator's contract and with a 2% per year raise effective January 1st.
Thank you, Bob. Do I have a second?
Second?
Any discussion on the motion?
I'd just like to make a comment
Yes.
that I didn't realize until tonight, that when employees get their 2% raise, I did not realize that it did not include the city administrator in that 2% raise. And so, you see what I'm saying? We voted in the budget to give the employees a 2% raise. And so that is not part of, Philip does not get that raise.
Unless you recommend it.
Right, unless we vote on it, yes. I did not realize that. And I think that's a common citizen would not know that either.
All right. We've been here long enough. We have a motion in a second. Although, well, roll call. Got to do roll call on this.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you've done for this city and your dedication to the city.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
if there's no further business, I move we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And guess what? I don't have to say anymore, beat somebody, hogs. All I gotta say is look out, A&M in 2 weeks, we're gonna get you too.
Here we come.
Here we come, whoopee. We are adjourned.